Before we talk about any of our live trials, there are a lot of other stories in the news that we want to talk about. Take a look.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Surveillance video shows the terrifying moments when a Dallas couple walking their dog was confronted by a group of teens armed with a shotgun in the midst of a crime spree. The couple, Garrett and Caroline Sharpton, were walking their dog when the group pulled up in a Chevrolet Malibu that was previously carjacked and attacked the couple.
Give me your money.
The group was responsible for a series of crimes leading up to their arrest and are now facing charges. Investigators have released a sketch of the man they think is responsible for the fatal shooting of a former doctor for former President George H.W. Bush. 65-year-old Dr. Mark Houseknecht was shot dead while riding his bike to work at the Texas Medical Center in Houston by another biker. Authorities released this sketch of the suspect as well as surveillance still images of the moments before Houseknecht was fatally shot. The suspect remains at large. A father and son pair of deputies in Palm Beach, Florida have been charged in separate murder and sexual assault cases. The father, Carlton Niebergall Jr., was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the killing of his son-in-law, and the son, Jason Niebergall, was separately charged with attempting to sexually assault a woman. Both men were deputies with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. Niebergall Jr. is facing an upcoming trial while his son was recently convicted of attempted sexual battery while in possession of a weapon and misdemeanor battery. Both men are no longer deputies. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Thank you, Anthony. You can go to lawandcrime.com to look at the other top trending stories of the day. But I really want to talk about that father and son duo. So to help me talk a little bit more about it, joining me right now is juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott. Ashley, it's great to have you back here on Law and Crime.
Thanks, Jesse. Great to see you this morning.
Now, I know crime can run in a family, but having a father and son who not only were charged at a similar time, two Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office deputies. They're both in the same office. Is this unusual?
Yeah, I think it's unusual. It's like made-for-TV movie, right? But the reality is you always hear that old adage, an apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I'm not suggesting that always to be the case, but I am going to say this. In this particular case, it certainly sounds like a very dysfunctional relationship. Who knows what the son might have been subjected to as a child or during his youth to then become a duo partner in crime with his own father.
Now, look, I don't like to hate on law enforcement at all, but it does raise the question whenever I see officers get in trouble with the law. I mean, one guy is on trial for first-degree murder. Another was convicted of a sexual assault. And so, you know, what I think is interesting, is it an abuse of power when you're in a position of authority for quite some time that you feel you're above the law? Is that something that you see when law enforcement officers get in trouble?
You know, I do think, first of all, generally, law enforcement's good. Officers are good. Officers are good. But unfortunately, when you do see officers go rogue or bad, so to speak, often there's an abuse of power connected to it. And it's exactly what you just identified, Jesse. They are in a powerful position potentially, and they abuse that power. So sure, it does happen. It may be outliers and not the norm, but it absolutely happens.
Jason Niebergall's conviction, that was on July 13th, it marked the end to a very troubled law enforcement career. He was subject to at least 25 internal reviews from different allegations, and in 2008, a captain and others had recommended that he be fired after he allegedly drew a gun on another deputy. So if he had all these problems in his colorful past, how is he still employed?
That's the problem. He shouldn't be. There's no question. When you look at that record, especially pulling a gun on a fellow deputy, I mean, I can't imagine or understand why he was still on the force. And not just that force, but any force, right? With that kind of history and pattern, you shouldn't be law enforcement.
Yeah, I don't think he should be. It is quite the case to follow here, and it's an interesting one nonetheless. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it as soon as we have an update. But Ashley, stand by. I want to switch gears right now and talk about the James Colley case. That is going to be one of our live trials today, and I just got an update that James Colley will testify. The judge says he's going to give new instructions to the jury because of this. This is a big development when you have the defendant who's going to testify and explain his side of the story. Remember, he's already been convicted. 2 counts of first-degree murder. He's trying to save his life here. He's trying to avoid the death penalty. So it is going to be something to watch. We will cover it here. But what I want to do right now is, as I explained at the top of the hour, there was some emotional testimony from family and friends of the victims. In particular, Chris Dobbins. This is Lindy Dobbins' husband. I want to play you some of his emotional testimony, and he can talk to you about what happened and what his life is, and for the children that he shares with Lindy, their 3 children, what life is like now. Take a look. It doesn't get any more real than that. It really doesn't. Ashley, when you listen to that testimony, it got to me. You have to imagine that it's going to get to the jurors.
Absolutely, because you're hearing firsthand directly how not only his life, but children's lives, everybody's lives are affected by this senseless murder of his wife, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of it should have happened. She went to help a friend. She was gunned down, murdered in cold blood. Her teeth were missing because of where he shot her in the temple. It's a horrible crime, and his testimony is going to be so compelling for the death penalty.
And you talk about the new normal. His new normal, now that he is a widow and has 3 children. It's never easy to hear, and the jury is listening to it. Now, here's what's going to happen. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're jumping in that Colley courtroom, and that defendant will testify. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. Now, before we go live into that James Colley courtroom, which we're about to go into, I have something I have to tell you. Guess what? Here on Law and Crime, we have a very special giveaway to talk about. That's right. If you go to lawandcrime.com and click the giveaway icon at the top of the homepage, you can enter to win a chance to get 2 tickets to CrimeCon in 2019 with a hotel stay. That's pretty nice. You get a chance to meet our very own Dan Abrams and get a studio tour of the Law and Crime Network set. And you can also get a Creepy Crate subscription and a Kindle loaded with true crime books from the lineup. Doesn't that all sound great? I wish I could enter into this, but unfortunately I can't. So again, go to lawandcrime.com and click the giveaway icon at the top of the homepage. Okay, so that's Dr. Daniel Buffington, a clinical pharmacologist, talking about the medication that was in the system of the defendant. But does this matter? Let's bring on Ashley Willcott. Okay, so in a perfect world for the defendant, let's say the prescription medication really had an adverse effect on him, really contributed to his whole behavior, the murders. Great, we can prove that. Is that going to convince a jury not to recommend the death penalty here?
Well, it could. So a couple cautionary things. First of all, when you listen to that, you think, wow, he's on all these different medications. They could have interacted and caused him to act without his recognizing he was doing it. Caution, how many different people take a number of different prescriptions, and doctors, psychiatrists are trained to ensure that the medications are not counteraddictive, meaning that they can, I don't think that was the right word, but in any event, so that they can take all the different meds at once. So I'm just saying to listeners and viewers, don't think just because he's on all those medications it's enough to say no death penalty. What you really have to look at is whether or not there are mitigating factors that caused him to act without recognizing or feeling like he was acting in this way. Right. And it may or may not, Jesse. I haven't yet heard enough testimony. But
I know. And we're going to take a quick break, but we're going to jump back in. I don't want our viewers or you to miss more of the testimony from Dr. Daniel Buffington. We'll be right back. Okay, so there's Dr. Daniel Buffington, clinical pharmacologist, trying to talk about the different prescription medication in the system of the defendant. Want to bring back in Ashley Willcott. So we talked about what this cocktail might have in terms of effects on the defendant, but do you think it's also generating sympathy for the defendant in the minds of the jury, that he has to be on all of this medication because of all the problems he suffers?
For me or for the jury? So
For the
I
jury.
don't
Let's
know.
talk about for the jury.
Right. I mean, it's a really hard call because the reality is, and I'm certain that some of these questions were likely asked of the jury during jury selection, how many of these jurists are on medication or have had experiences with medication or others on medication? So I don't know if it's garnering sympathy or not. I can't really tell yet.
Well, I can tell you one thing. This same jury convicted him of 2 counts of first-degree murder, so maybe sympathy is not exactly what they feel, but it does maybe raise an issue in their minds. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. So we are live right now in the James Colley courtroom. Again, this is the death penalty phase. The same jury that convicted him of 2 counts of first-degree murder now has to decide what his punishment will ultimately be, life in prison or the death penalty. Dr. Daniel Buffington, a clinical pharmacologist, is back on the stand talking about all of the prescription medication that was in the system of the defendant. And the defense is trying to say, hey, this is a mitigating factor. Let's talk about what really contributed to the violence here. But did it? Let's bring back on juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott. Are you getting the sense from what we're hearing from Dr. Buffington that Ambien, Cymbalta, a mixture of the medications can cause violent, erratic, and dangerous behavior?
Not yet, and that's because of the specific words that he used, and I wrote some of them down from his testimony. So, for instance, he said you should not drive a car. There may be confusion, tremors, insomnia, anxiety, won't knock you out, will make you drowsier. So I don't think that these words all taken together rise to that level at all yet.
Okay, well, let's jump back in. We can learn a little bit more about this cocktail of prescription medication. Okay, let's try to understand a little bit more of what's going on here with the clinical pharmacologist, Dr. Daniel Buffington. I want to bring back on Ashley Willcott. So what I'm getting the sense of is memory lapse. Do you see that a lot of times in cases where prescription medication can create an issue where a defendant doesn't remember what happened?
Well, I think that's he's suggesting in defense argument. I, as a trial attorney and as a judge on the bench, I don't see that a lot. Instead, what I see is the argument that it creates behaviors that are odd, perhaps not remembered all of them, but that's usually an Ambien defense, and this defense has a number of different medications involved. So I'm not real sure exactly where he's going with this, because the other thing that's interesting, Jesse, is that he's remembering pieces of it, but not other pieces, and he's not cognizant of getting ready. He doesn't really remember the backyard, but there are other pieces he remembers. So far, I don't find this super compelling testimony for the defense. Not yet, anyway.
And let's not forget what the defense is trying to do is present enough mitigating factors that outweigh the aggravating factors in this case in order to convince at least one juror that the defendant should not be sentenced to death. And we'll have to see if it works. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we're jumping back into the James Colley courtroom. We really don't want you to miss anything. Stay tuned. All right, so they're going to a quick break. I want to break this down right now ourselves with juvenile judge and trial attorney Ashley Willcott. Ashley, we're listening to this. Dr. Daniel Buffington, the clinical pharmacologist, the defense is putting this evidence forward as mitigating evidence. Let's talk more about what the prosecution is doing. What, in your opinion, are the strongest aggravating factors in favor of the death penalty?
So in terms of the aggravating factors, look at all of the evidence that caused them to convict. The clear deliberation, right? Premeditated, because he went through a series of steps to actually shoot and kill these individuals over a longer period of time. And so you hear that he was mad at the hearing in the morning, and then he went through and he got the guns and he stole things from the house and he ransacked the house, and then he showed up at the house later. And so I think all of those are the premeditated pieces, and the really the horrificness of the crime and how he murdered them and he hunted them. And you have testimony from one of the victims in the closet and what it felt like to basically be hunted. So all of that adds up to all of those aggravating circumstances.
And it's that weighing test. The jury has to do that weighing test, and there's no science to it. It is not an easy job for any juror, let alone in this kind of case. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, there's a lot more to discuss here on Law and Crime. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. So we're in a break right now in the James Colley courtroom. It's an interesting day hearing the defense putting on their arguments about the effects that this prescription medication had on the defendant. And as you heard from Dr. Daniel Buffington, he said the defendant was substantially impaired. But will that convince at least one jury member that perhaps the defendant was not so responsible for the crimes that he committed, and therefore maybe should not be sentenced to death? That's the ultimate question, and we are covering it here. So as soon as the feed comes back, we'll make sure to go into that courtroom. In the meantime, there is always a lot of trending stories happening in the news, and we want to bring it to you. So here's a special report about that.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Surveillance video shows the terrifying moments when a Dallas couple walking their dog was confronted by a group of teens armed with a shotgun in the midst of a crime spree. The couple, Garrett and Caroline Sharpton, were walking their dog when the group pulled up in a Chevrolet Malibu that was previously carjacked and attacked the couple.
Give me your wallet.
The group was responsible for a series of crimes leading up to their arrest and are now facing charges. Investigators have released a sketch of the man they think is responsible for the fatal shooting of a former doctor for former President George H.W. Bush. 65-year-old Dr. Mark Houseknecht was shot dead while riding his bike to work at the Texas Medical Center in Houston by another biker. Authorities released this sketch of the suspect as well as surveillance still images of the moments before Houseknecht was fatally shot. The suspect remains at large. A father and son pair of deputies in Palm Beach, Florida, have been charged in separate murder and sexual assault cases. The father, Carlton Niebergall Jr., was charged with first-degree murder in connection with the killing of his son-in-law, and the son, Jason Niebergall, was separately charged with attempting to sexually assault a woman. Both men were deputies with the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. Niebergall Jr. is facing an upcoming trial while his son was recently convicted of attempted sexual battery while in possession of a weapon and misdemeanor battery. Both men are no longer deputies. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Great stories, great reporting as always, Anthony. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more about the top trending stories of the day. But I want to talk about that father and son deputy duo right there, and I want to bring back on Ashley Willcott. Ashley, in your experience, you're a juvenile court judge. You see a lot of time crime stays in the family, maybe a lot between fathers and sons. Do you see this a lot?
I don't see it a lot, so it's really interesting that it's happened in this particular case. But again, outliers, you do see it, and the relationships that they sometimes have are very dysfunctional. And so I think that's just a prime example of that. Who knows what this son went through as a child or what he went through with his father, but it's certainly a dysfunctional relationship that can happen.
Now, one officer was convicted of sexual assault. Another one is on trial for murder. Officers going on trial for these kinds of crimes, is that something you see often?
Not enough, to be quite honest. We see the ones that are big in the media case, but honestly, if officers engage in this kind of behavior, we should see these crimes being charged against them. And I think sometimes that doesn't happen.
Now, is there any way as an officer that this man, Carlton Niebergall Jr., the father who faces first-degree murder charge, saying he's an officer, is that any way that can help him in his defense for the case? Now, I know we don't know all the details of it. He's been charged with killing his son-in-law. There was an eyewitness there. The evidence from what we see seems to be pretty strong, but is there any way that he could say, look, I'm an officer, I knew there was a threat, I don't know what his defense is, but just looking at it from the outside, what do you think his best defense is, and maybe using his title as a deputy?
Well, I do think that the argument's going to be, look, it's an upstanding citizen by virtue of the fact he's in law enforcement and he's never lost that job. He hasn't been fired. He still is with law enforcement, or was. I think defense certainly is going to use that to try to bolster his credibility.
And then you look at the son, when he had his trial, the jury didn't believe for 1 second that the sexual assault victim was making up the story that she had a vendetta against police. So it doesn't always work.
Right.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, it does not always work. And, you have to see through that, because regardless of what position somebody holds, if they've committed a crime and the evidence is there beyond a reasonable doubt, well, they did it. Doesn't matter what they do for a living.
Yep, and we're going to cover it as soon as we have an update about those cases. We'll let you know. We'll let you know here on Law and Crime. But I do want to switch gears, Ashley, so stand by. We're talking about the James Colley case. We're waiting to go back live into that courtroom. Yesterday was day one of the penalty phase, and the state presented, I have to tell you, extremely compelling testimony from the family and friends of the victims, Amanda Colley, as well as Lindy Dobbins. In particular, I want to play you the testimony of Lindy Dobbins' father. Now imagine this for a second. Not only is it tough for a father to bury his daughter, but she didn't die from a sickness or an accident. She died because she was killed, because she was murdered. So go into his head, go into his shoes, and I want to play his testimony right now. Welcome back, everybody. We're playing you the heart-wrenching testimony of family and friends who were testified yesterday on behalf of the victims in the James Colley case. I want to bring back on Ashley Willcott. One of the common themes that I kept seeing is they talked about the despair that they felt and how their lives are so different. What I didn't see so much, where I've seen in other courtrooms, is where they point at the defendant and really go after him. But maybe that wasn't necessary. What do you think?
Right. I think in this case, they're really just trying to play to the sympathy and understand exactly who the person is that they lost or how they've been affected by it. And so I think that can be a really effective strategy, and that's the one they're using in this case. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's just, I'm listening to it and I'm really visualizing what their lives are like and how this is a tragedy in so many different ways. People have lost mothers, sisters, daughters, wives. It's horrible, horrible situation. Ashley, stand by. Well, we're going to come back. We have a lot more to cover in the James Colley case, and we may be back live in the courtroom. Stay tuned. We'll find out. Welcome back, everybody. So we're live in the James Colley courtroom. We see a feed in there. We're going to jump back in there as soon as the witness comes back on the stand. Dr. Daniel Buffington, that clinical pharmacologist, is about to be grilled by the state. He was brought forth by the defense to talk a little bit about what was in the system of the defendant, the different prescription medication, cocaine, how that had a substantial impact on his behavior and actions. And again, the defense is trying to do whatever they can to save the life of their client, because he could face the death penalty here. I mean, that's what we're talking about. I want to bring back in Ashley Willcott to talk about this. Ashley, even though the jurors, when they were selected, say that they would be impartial to the death penalty and that they would view it, listen to all the factors appropriately, and they didn't come in one way or another, it's very hard for a juror to sentence someone or to recommend a sentence of death, correct? Absolutely. It's the hardest thing you're going to have to do as a juror. Completely agree. And what is I don't know how to say this, the perfect case where you're like, this seems, I definitely see that they're going to recommend death, or whereas here, maybe a different kind of case? Does this fall into one kind of spectrum or another? I mean, when we look at all the factors here. Well, sure. Think about some of the cases where you have the death penalty. You really don't have any mitigating factors. You don't have any argument that they're taking medications that may have contributed, or that their behaviors were in such a way that weren't the norm. Sometimes it's just cold-blooded murder, so to speak. So at least for the defense's sake in this case, not at least for the victims, but from the defense's perspective in this case, he was on different medications. And so they have an opening to say, listen, this was a mitigating factor and it did outweigh the aggravating circumstances. Well, let's play a little bit of the defense's opening statement from yesterday during the penalty phase, and we could try to understand a little bit where they're headed and what they want the jury to think. Let's go from yesterday.
From yesterday in the penalty phase, Ashley Willcott, what do you think? They're doing an attempt to humanize the defendant.
Absolutely, and they want to say, listen to how many people speak highly of him, right? And he's not that bad of a guy. And yes, this happened, but there are these mitigating circumstances, and so they're certainly attempting to bring it all together to get some sympathy out of at least one of those jurors. As you pointed out, Jesse, we only need one.
Well, the defense has tried to do that so far with Dr. Daniel Buffington, who's on the stand, this clinical pharmacologist, talking about, oh, well, all this medication was in the defendant, had a substantial impact on him. Well, let's hear how he does right now. We're going live when he's cross-examined by the state. Let's go. So that's Dr. Daniel Buffington, pharmacologist, being grilled by the prosecutors. This was a defense witness. But what are we getting out of it? Again, I'm here with juvenile judge, trial attorney Ashley Willcott. What are we getting out of this? Anything?
I don't know. So the prosecution did do a good point bringing out and reiterating what he already said on direct examination, which is we're not talking about intoxication. This has not been a mitigating factor of he is intoxicated. So they got that reiterated. And then they did talk about the cocaine and the alcohol in each step. So I'm not feeling super compelled in saying, wow, prosecution's getting all this great evidence out of this witness. I think they're just trying to pick apart his testimony and show it wasn't a mitigating factor.
So, Ashley, I know we don't have much more time with you, unfortunately. So in 20 seconds or so, which do you think way this court is going to go?
In terms of the jury, I think it's going to be death penalty. I really do. I don't think the mitigating factors are significant enough.
Okay, well, we'll have to see. We have one more day of this, we believe, today and tomorrow, but things could change. We'll let everybody know. Ashley, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to have you on the program, and we can't wait to have you back.
All right, thank you, Jesse.
Okay, everybody. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be live in the courtroom. Dr. Daniel Buffington could still be on there, or maybe we'll have a new witness. Stay tuned. There's a lot that we're covering here on Law and Crime, and this is the James Colley case.